Putting adhesive on this may have been an accident or a bad idea. That could be a lesson learned. Hello and welcome back to the Boat Shed. My name is John and this boat here is Antidote. I'm an engineer and a sailor with a dream of fixing up this old boat to go sailing around the world, but I've got a lot of work to do first. Last time we were all here, we were working on getting the foam ready for this next section as we work our way back on the deck. At least that was the plan until we ran into some issues here removing this balsa. This is the first area you'll remember where we had a nice headliner down below instead of the regular raw fiberglass of the forward section. Up from the bottom are some screws coming through the laminate, and these are actually holding up braces which support the headliner. So they're really important to make sure that the headliner stays where it's supposed to, and by bulldozing all these screws out, there would be then nothing holding that up. I think I have a reasonable idea to drive screws from the top down back into the braces in areas where I know that there are braces. Then I can take the old screws out and have a reasonable chance of the headliner staying where it's supposed to be. So that'll probably be a good strategy along the side decks. While you guys were away, I took the liberty of removing the rest of the headliner from the head, so that was in the two cabinets here. And that was a little bit of a challenge because some of the screws that were holding that together were actually hidden directly above the really nice millwork that I wanted to keep in good shape. So I did have to buzz a couple of those screws in half and remove things, cut and pry and hack, but we were able to get it all out. The replacement should go much smoother, and that I'll be able to slide things over this old cabinetry and hopefully get a really nice finish in there, but we'll just have to wait and see on that. I've also removed some more of the balsa here, so I'll have a nice clean area to work back to about where the prisms are. I'm continually amazed by the condition of the wood that I'm finding inside this deck. Here's a piece that I can remove with my bare hands, and right next to it, this one, I squeeze it and water comes out like a dish sponge in my kitchen sink. And here's another one that doesn't require any special tools to remove. So I removed another section of balsa here. I left enough so I'd be able to walk around. This is gonna give me some access to start bringing back and lay the foam in this area. The water damage seems to be really randomly distributed. You'll have pieces that are completely falling apart right next to ones that seem to be okay, but everything is quite wet. This really makes me wonder if any of those drill and fill, inject epoxy type solutions actually work. I've heard some stories that they can work to fix a deck. I don't know if I believe it. Maybe that's something that would be an interesting thing to test and look at in a future video. So let me know in the comments if you'd like to see something like that in the future. We're going to be rebuilding some of these prism housings. I have an idea for that I'm excited to show you. And in the short term, including today, we're gonna get to work here on putting some foam back in this area as we start getting that hatch ready to go back in. At least for now, the plan is to keep the hatch. I haven't read all your comments yet on what to do about it. So I'm very curious to see what you thought of the last video. Let's get started with a little bit of prep work. We need to grind the scarf back into the bulwark on this side and this side. We're going to rough up some of this glass that's been recently uncovered, and I would need to do some patchwork before we lay foam on this area. We're going to start by wiping down the bulwarks with some acetone to get any of those impurities off of there so that when we start grinding it, we're not going to be rubbing that into the fiberglass, but instead just removing the material you want to and getting it nice and clean, ready for new fiberglass. Here we go. Let's take a quick second to say thanks to the folks on Patreon that really helped make this channel a possibility, especially the folks whose names are appearing now on the screen. Thank you all so much. If you're interested in joining the Patreon group, you can check out this link right up here. Back to the video. The scarf joint now along the port side is looking pretty good. We were able to tie in that right angle fairly quickly along here. You'll remember in an earlier video I did that job with my Bosch 6-inch random orbital sander on turbo mode, and I'm really happy with the way that thing works. It does remove material very fast for what it is, and especially with the dust control that it has, it's excellent. Now for this time I used my 7-inch polisher set to the slowest possible speed and a 7-inch flapper disc. I think it's a 40 grit flap disc, and it's very aggressive, so it actually knocked that down in a lot less time. So I think I'll do that going forward. It does create a lot more dust, as you might have already noticed, so that's the downside, but I think we're going to try and haul along here, picking up some speed. Now I want to rough up the lower skin a bit, and we have those screws poking through, so I think we'll go down below. I've marked off all the braces so I know where they go, so when I drop them down I can lay them out and copy them with some new wood, perhaps is I think what I'm going to use for that. So let's get those out of the way now so the skin can be totally roughed up. We want to bring it back a little ways so that we can start gluing in the new edges for the foam and keep going on this deck. Let's get back to work. With those screws removed and the braces now stored out of the way, we're ready to continue with the bottom skin here. So I want to get this ready to add another layer of 1708 across the whole surface, and that's going to do two things. It's going to add some more strength to the deck. That's something that I want to do because the bottom skin was substantially thinner than the top skin in the original build. Adding that glass also gives me the opportunity to seal all these holes and different cracks and things that I've found in this top skin, so it will seal up better when I go to use the vacuum to pull the core tight. For this, we're using my custom modified 7-inch angle grinder. You'll see here we have a nice new dust attachment on here. And this is something I rigged up because we do get a lot more dust from this, although running it on the slow speed makes a very coarse dust that's easy to pick up in the vacuum. And this is one of my iPhone camera mounts that I use around the shed here to get you all this footage. And I've repurposed it. I've added the handle to the grinder. I took off the camera holder end of my mount and added a different end that has a clamp on it. So I've got two clamps here and I'm able now to hold my hose and articulate this quite nicely. This is going to do a great job, I hope, of keeping that hose right where I want it so I can pick up all that dust and abrade this surface down without creating too much dust in the shop itself. We'll get the filter running, things like that, but let's see how this works. And if you're interested in picking something like this up for camera work or to make a custom mount like this, I'll put a link in the description down below. Let's see how this goes. All right, this lower skin is looking pretty good. We've got it all roughed up, a nice tooth in it to accept epoxy, foam, and fiberglass. The scarf joint is copied now from the port side to the starboard side. So this is all looking really good. All we need to do is clean it up, and then we can start shoving some new foam blocks underneath the bulwarks. So how did the sander attachment work? This improvised solution to pick up some of the dust. I would say it works pretty well. Certainly a lot better than nothing at all, or trying to hold it with a second hand. I'd give it a 6 out of 10. So I'm still in the market looking around for a good solution for a grinder that I can slow way down and has a dust shroud on it. This one doesn't play nice with the dust shrouds that I've seen. So if you know of a solution out there, let me know in the comments down below. You saw there in the middle that we had to remove that stanchion base to get clearance for running the sander by there. And whenever I'm taking these parts off, I'm marking them so that I know where they go. I'm using a little engraver just to put a little number in this. So this one says 3S, which is the third one on the starboard side. And then hopefully when I go to put these all back, it'll be very clear and they'll line up nicely. As far as removing all the balsa from underneath the bulwarks, there's a couple of things that have been working relatively well for me. One is the small cat's paw, we talked about that before. The 7-inch flap disc actually gets most of the way underneath there, which is great for roughing up the bottom skin. And then for doing the top, I've been trying to just scrape it with the edge of my chisel, as well as using a sanding block. And I've just got this little piece of wood and I've wrapped an old belt sander belt around it. And this I'm able to just apply pressure on the upside, downside, and on the back and run this around inside. And this has done a reasonably good job, I think, of clearing out all of the rest of the wood fibers, getting a nice tooth on the inside of the scarf joint. So I think we're ready now to start gluing pieces in. You might remember that the last time that I put some foam underneath the bulwarks, I went to some efforts to make it a fairly tight fit. And I've had some input from some people that suggest that perhaps having a bit looser fit would be better and that it would promote more squish out. And I think that's a good idea because I didn't get a lot of squish out the first time and I actually ended up with some voids in the back and we had to pump epoxy up through that to prevent that. So I think this time we're gonna skip that extra step and we're gonna cut the foam blocks two ways that make it a little different than last time. Now, the first time that we made these strips, we used one continuous piece on either side of the bulwark. Today we want to come back another 40 inches, and instead of doing a single piece, we're going to do 4 pieces, 10-inch long, 3¼ inch wide strips. So we're going to utilize this little piece of scrap here. We'll cut it down into little blocks, and then those will just go along the side of the bulwark, and they'll take up that curve ever so slightly. And as we squish them all in with lots of thickened epoxy, we'll get good squeeze out hopefully. But for now, let's just get these hogged in there. So we'll cut these all out, and then with the magic of editing, these blocks are all ready to go. So this is the original piece from the first go around. You see I've got tape on here, but you'll notice there's a bit of a taper here. It's fatter on this end than over here. We're gonna copy this somewhat because I do wanna be full thickness on this end, so when it goes up with the other core material, the height is all the same. But we're gonna be a little bit less picky about getting this taper just right. As long as the fit is good and there can be some gaps, that will be good to go. So we're gonna hit these on the disc sander here, and that should make quick work of this. Breaking news update. After I made my first block and test fit it underneath the bulwark using roughly the same process as the first time, I started to think, hey, am I just going down the exact same road I've already been down? And the tight fit here led me to believe that maybe I wanted to change things a little bit. So what I've done here is I've cut another one out using my table saw, and I just ripped a little ledge into this instead. So I still have the final thickness that I want over here. And I did buzz the corners down on the disc sander just to make sure that this goes all the way into the very back. But I'm hoping now that this gives me a little bit more gap here on this area so that there's a lot of room for epoxy to squish in and fill in the gap, but I still have my final thickness on the edge for when I go to put the rest of the core in. So we're gonna make a few more of these and try this method on the starboard side, see how it goes, and if we like it, maybe this is the plan going back. Here we go. We have the 4 pieces now for the starboard side, test fit, and everything was looking really good. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put this piece on the very end, and this is gonna kind of act as a stop to make sure that any of that wet epoxy can't squeeze out past the 4 blocks. Covered in packing tape so that it will release nicely from the mold. And then we're gonna cover this now in a little bit of peel ply. So I'm gonna do that, drape this over carefully, might use a little bit of adhesive to hold it on tightly. And so the point here is gonna be that when we do remove this, to continue on with this bulwark stuffing block, we're gonna have a nice prepared surface, so we'll be able to pull that peel ply off, hopefully, and then continue on with this process. Otherwise, we'd get blush in there and have to clean it all up and stuff like that, or possibly get a bunch of spill out that makes it difficult to put new blocks in. So we're gonna mix up some epoxy and fire these in. that system seemed to work pretty well. Doing it in the smaller sections definitely gives you a lot more squeeze out to monitor and make sure you're getting all the pieces fully set in and fully encased in epoxy. So it's the next day. We're gonna pull this peel ply up and see how it looks. This is looking pretty good. So the peel ply has done a nice job here. I see a couple spots where I have some gaps and bubbles. That's probably not a huge surprise, seeing as it's a lot to ask it to do this kind of complicated bend, but it's gonna be a lot better than not having it at all. So we might just have a little bit of cleanup to do with some blush, but overall, really happy with that. Sounding it out, it does sound pretty solid compared to over there where there's nothing supporting underneath. So I think we've done a good job with the squeeze out. I'm gonna try to make it even better on the next go around. So kind of like everything on this channel, we're learning as we go. Well, I suppose the first thing to try is to get this end block freed up. So we'll just see if we can fight this out of here. Putting adhesive on this may have been an accident or a bad idea. This might not come free very easily. That could be a lesson learned. The first time I did this, I didn't put adhesive on the peel ply and I had some bunching, but I was able to get the block out. This time I have the block stuck in. So there, it's starting to go. Okay, so that was a pain to get out, but it did a great job of preparing that surface actually. So it looks like we're really in good shape there. Will I do that again? I don't know, 50-50. Okay, well now the fun part. Get this peel ply off. So predictably, we have a couple of little bubbles here that we'll have to sand these off, soap and water to make sure there's no blush on anything. Generally, this came out really good. Ready now to do the same thing on the port side as we did on the starboard side. You'll notice here we have a little bit of patching that we did. That was just to raise up some of the low spots and the gouges that I accidentally took out when we removed the balsa earlier. So using vinyl ester and some 1.5 ounce CSM for that does a great job, and it's super fast using that stuff. Luckily, the epoxy will adhere really well over top of the vinyl ester, not so much the other way around. So once I've used epoxy on things, I can't really go back to those other resins, but I happen to have some of that lying around. Works great with the CSM because it melts that styrene binder, breaks it down nicely and lays it really flat. Now I am a little distracted because next to my camera we have a new friend here in the shop. We don't see these around here very often, and this guy's huge, so I don't know where you're from, little guy, but we need to give you a name and put you to work in here. Anyway, getting back on track here, we'll try a trick of mass to see if I can speed this up. Doesn't seem to be working, so we'll just go with the old fashioned. And just like that, we've got it done. So this is working a lot better now than the original way. So doing the shorter blocks is really helping me out. I'm getting a lot of good squish out, and having that relief cut actually gives me room for the squish out on the top and the bottom. So when I'm pushing them in and I'm getting lots of squeeze out on the top and the bottom, and sometimes you even hear that air kind of hissing out and pockets popping, then I feel really confident that we've got a good solid bond and all of that cavity filled. This time we also worked the peel ply in really well, and I don't think I'm gonna have those same problems with air pockets. Again, we've got the piece on the back here. I didn't put glue on it that time, so hopefully that'll release a lot easier. So let's come back tomorrow and see how it looks. All right, welcome back. It's the following day. Let's see how that turned out. All right, so it looks pretty good. We definitely were able to get the peel ply on way better this second go around, so we're really dialing this process in, I think, and I was able to wrap it around that curve pretty nicely using the thickened epoxy. Really helps to hold that on. I'm paying a little bit more attention to it. Looks like it's paid off. Hopefully the block here in the back will bust off a lot easier than the other one and still leave a good finish. Let's pull this off and see how it looks. So the block comes out easily. This is sort of what I was hoping would happen the first time. So now I should be able to just pull off the peel ply. There it goes. Let's see how it looks in there. Pretty good. Good news first, everything behind that end block looks really good, so that worked pretty well and was easier to remove. Bad news is, because I left it a little on the short side, I had some squish through actually come around the back and glob out the other side. So that's a little unfortunate, that's on me, but we'll work around that. It's not the end of the world, but I think I can get it out, and it's only been in there for 24 hours, so this is the time to do it before it's fully hardened. But anyway, life carries on. Next time I'm gonna make the block a lot thicker. That looks excellent. This is great. With that out of the way, this seems like a great time to ask you to hit that like button for me. It should be right down about there. Thank you so much. We are ready now to put this layer of glass down here on the bow, and I've already gone ahead and cleaned this area up and filled in a few more areas with some of those CSM patches just to try to promote as much as possible an even lower layer here. We cut this out down in the shop and then trimmed it to size up here in place. Now, if I was really thinking, I would have laid it upside down, and that's just because that if I wanted to do any sanding on the top before we put the new foam in to knock down any high spots, I'd be taking off the CSM layer and not the structural parallel fibers. Anyway, we'll put this down the traditional way, and this is 30 ounces of fabric, so we need about 30 ounces of resin, and I'm sort of tired of pushing the pumps for big batches like this, so I think we'll reference the old cheat sheet here and pour these out of the can, sort of the more traditional way, mix these up, and we should be good to go. So with that, let's get started. Really pleased with the way this is looking. So that'll need a little bit of time now to fully cure, harden, and cook up. So if you're hoping to see the peel ply come off this time, I'm really sorry. You're gonna have to come back for another one. And we'll know what we're doing with that forward hatch in the next episode. So hope you'll join us for all of that. If you're new to the story and want to get caught up from the very beginning, there's a playlist for you right here. And if you'd like to subscribe to this channel for more of this content, I'd love that. Button's right there. See y'all next time.